My name's Jack Callahan, and for 22 years, my whole world was concrete and steel. I spent my days at Northgate Correctional Facility, but I wasn't an inmate. I was a corrections officer. In a place like Northgate, you learn fast there are two kinds of authority, the kind that comes from your badge and the kind that comes from respect. The badge gets you compliance. Respect is what keeps you alive when the cameras are off. I had that respect. I'd earned it by being firm, fair, and predictable for 2 decades in a world built on chaos. I was the old guard, the bedrock of the place. But the ground under my feet had started to crumble, and it was crumbling from the top down. Our new warden, Jacobs, was a man who talked the talk of reform but practiced the art of decay. He saw guys like me, the veteran officers, as dinosaurs. He didn't see the inmates as men who'd made dangerous choices. He saw them as misunderstood clients. His policies were hollowing out the discipline and order that kept the violence from boiling over, creating a power vacuum that the worst guys in there were more than happy to fill. For years, I just watched it happen, holding my corner of the line, a quiet wall against the rising tide of chaos. I told myself it was just a job, that I could keep my head down and ride it out to retirement. But then they pushed. The inmates, feeling bold under a warden who saw them as victims, decided to test the old guard one last time. They provoked me, thinking I was just some relic of a bygone era. They were wrong. What I did next wasn't some big show of force. It wasn't a riot. It was a cold, quiet, and calculated response, a move so precise it wouldn't just echo through the cell blocks. It would shatter the warden's office, expose a rot so deep it threatened to bring the whole institution down, and leave the man who enabled it all completely and utterly shocked. This is the story of that reaction. Before we get into it, if you're drawn to stories about justice, strategy, and the hidden worlds behind bars, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Northgate wasn't a supermax, but it sure as hell wasn't a country club. It was a place where 500 men, most of whom had spent their lives breaking rules, were forced to live by 1,000 of them. My job, for most of my adult life, was to be the man on the line enforcing those rules. You don't survive that long on muscle. You survive on your wits and your word. The inmates knew that if Callahan said something, it was either a promise or a warning, and I never broke either. My world was black and white. Do your time, follow the rules, and don't cause trouble for me or my guys. It was a simple code, and for almost 20 years it worked. The prison had a pulse of its own. It was a low thrum of tension you could feel in your bones the second you walked through the main gate. The air smelled of industrial cleaner, stale sweat, and simmering anger. Every day was a tightrope walk over a pit of vipers. As an officer, you become a student of human nature at its most raw. You learn to read the little shifts in the yard, the way a conversation dies when you walk up to a table, the flicker of a look that lasts a second too long. These were the signals that told you if the day would end with a routine count or with a shriek of a code red alarm. I was a sergeant, running C block, one of the toughest assignments in the facility. I knew every man in my block, their crimes, their families, their crew, and their weakness. I knew Shotgun. Riley ran the contraband trade from his bunk with a network of whispers. I knew Preacher, a lifer doing time for something unimaginable, held an unofficial court in the laundry room, settling disputes the gangs couldn't. I wasn't their friend, but I understood their world. This understanding was the key to control. It wasn't about friendship, it was about balance. We, the officers, were the shepherds, and they were the flock. A flock of wolves, maybe, but a flock that had to be managed, not scattered. Then Warden Jacobs showed up. He rode in on a wave of political goodwill, some reformer sent by the state to modernize our so-called antiquated ways. He was tall, always impeccably dressed, with a smile that never quite made it to his eyes. He spouted words like rehabilitative justice, de-escalation, and inmate empowerment. On paper, it sounded great. In practice, It was like throwing gasoline on a bonfire. Jacobs saw Northgate as just a spreadsheet. He saw inmates as stats to be improved and officers as expenses to be cut. He dismantled the programs that actually worked, the ones that gave inmates a path, and replaced them with feel-good projects that had no teeth. His pet project was a new prison labor program he called vocational restoration. He brought in a private contractor, a company called Sterling Solutions, to run it. Inmates would assemble cheap electronics for pennies on the dollar. Jacobs sold it to the state as a way to cut down on repeat offenders and make the prison pay for itself. He sold it to the inmates as an opportunity. But us officers on the floor, we saw it for what it was, a total mess. The program was a security nightmare. It gave certain inmates, especially the powerful ones, a whole new level of freedom and access inside the walls. They were moving tools, supplies, and who knows what else, all under the cover of work. The warden's biggest cheerleader among the inmates was a guy named Silas Crane. Silas was a slick, smart sociopath serving 20 to life. He had the charm of a politician and the soul of a predator. Under the old warden, Silas was on a tight leash. Under Jacobs, he was thriving. He became the foreman of the vocational program, the warden's star pupil. He was Jacobs's proof that the new way was working. To us, he was the warden's pet snake, coiled and ready to strike. Jacobs systematically took away the authority of veteran officers. Our reports on gang activity were brushed off as old-school paranoia. Our requests for disciplinary action were overturned for mediation sessions. The inmates learned the new rules of the game way faster than we did. They knew a complaint against an officer, no matter how ridiculous, would be taken seriously by the warden's office. It created a chilling effect. Officers got hesitant, second-guessing every order, terrified of ending up on the wrong side of a complaint form. The balance was gone. The wolves weren't being managed anymore. They were being fed. I remember one afternoon, standing on the catwalk overlooking the yard. I saw a group of younger inmates, loyal to Silas, cornering a new fish, a kid barely 20. It was a classic shakedown. 10 years ago, just my presence would have scattered them. 5 years ago, a sharp word would have done it. That day, they just looked up at me, and one of them, a punk named Rico, gave me this slow, disrespectful grin. He knew. They all knew. The man on the catwalk was just a man. The real power was in the warden's office, and the warden was on their side. I had to walk down there and break it up myself, earning a string of curses and a formal complaint from Rico for officer harassment. And Jacobs made me apologize to him. That was the moment I knew Northgate was truly broken. It wasn't my prison anymore. It was theirs. The breaking point didn't come with a bang. It came with a whisper, and then a brutal silence. His name was Officer Miller. He was young, maybe 25, with a wife and a baby girl at home. He was green, but he was good. He had the right instincts, that quiet courage you need for this job. He reminded me of me, 20 years back, before the cynicism really took hold. I'd taken him under my wing, taught him how to read the yard, how to talk to inmates without showing fear, and most important, how to get home safe at the end of his shift. Miller's one flaw was that he was a true believer. He believed in the system. He believed in Warden Jacobs and his reforms. He thought if he just did his job by the new, enlightened rulebook Jacobs had written, everything would be okay. He didn't get that Jacobs's book was a work of fiction. It started in the mess hall. It's always the mess hall. 400 angry, bored, and hungry men packed into a concrete box. It's the most dangerous room in any prison. A new busload of inmates had just come in from a rival facility, and the tension was thicker than the cheap gravy on the potatoes. Silas Crane and his crew were holding court at their table, oozing untouchable arrogance. Miller was on duty, walking the line. He saw an exchange. A small, tight package passed from one of Silas's runners to a new inmate. It was quick, but Miller saw it. He was a good cop. He followed the new protocol, the one Jacobs himself had written. He calmly approached the new inmate and said, "I need you to hand over what you were just given." The inmate, feeling protected by Silas's crew, refused. He got loud. "I ain't got nothin', man. This pig is harassing me." The whole mess hall went silent. Every single eye was on Miller. It was a test. A public challenge. Silas just watched from his table with a little smirk on his face. He was directing this whole play without saying a word. Miller, to his credit, didn't back down. He repeated the command. The inmate shoved him. It was a light shove, more symbolic than anything, but it was a line crossed. Assault on an officer. Before the reforms, the response would have been instant and overwhelming. Officers would have swarmed, the inmate would have been on the floor in seconds, and he'd be looking at 6 months in the SHU. But this was Jacobs's prison. Miller, following his de-escalation training, didn't lay a hand on the guy. He reached for his radio to call for backup. That was his mistake. The second he looked away, another inmate, one of Silas's enforcers, blindsided him. Miller went down hard, his head cracking against the concrete floor. Chaos erupted. Not a full-blown riot, but damn close. We got Miller out of there, but the damage was done. A severe concussion, a fractured orbital bone. His face was a swollen, purple mess. When I saw him in the infirmary, he looked at me with his one good eye, his belief completely shattered. "I did what they told me to, Sarge," he whispered. "I followed the procedure." The fallout was even worse. Warden Jacobs's official report was a work of bureaucratic fiction. It described the event not as a targeted assault, but as a spontaneous altercation where Officer Miller fell and struck his head. The inmates involved got a slap on the wrist, a week of lost commissary. Silas Crane's name was nowhere in the report. I confronted Jacobs in his office. It was the first time I'd ever raised my voice to a warden. "You're calling that a fall?" I demanded, slamming the sham report on his desk. "That kid was attacked. One of your pet projects, Silas Crane, set the whole thing up, and you're covering for him." Jacobs didn't even have the decency to look angry. He just looked bored. He leaned back in his expensive chair, a picture of calm. "Sergeant Callahan," he said, his voice smooth as glass, "my priority is the stability of this facility. A report of a coordinated assault would bring scrutiny from the state that we just don't need. It would jeopardize my programs. Officer Miller is young. He'll heal. The system is what matters." The system? I couldn't believe it. "You've turned the system into a joke. You're protecting the predators and punishing the people holding the line." He gave me that cold, empty smile. "Your view is noted, Sergeant. But you're a line officer. You see the pieces. I see the whole board. My advice to you is to go back to your block and manage your pieces. Leave the grand strategy to me." I walked out of his office, blood pounding in my ears. He was right about one thing. It was a board game. But he'd made a fatal mistake. He thought I was just one of his pieces. What he didn't get was that for 22 years, I'd been studying that board more closely than he ever could. He had provoked me. And in that moment, I decided the game had to change. I wasn't going to be his piece anymore. I was going to be the player. And I was about to flip the entire board. For 2 days, I did nothing. Walked my rounds, supervised the count, signed my reports. On the outside, I was the same old Sergeant Callahan. But inside, this cold, quiet rage was hardening into a plan. My first instinct was to walk into C Block, find Silas Crane, and deliver the kind of justice that doesn't get written up in a report. But that was their game, brute force. To beat a man like Jacobs, you couldn't use a fist. You had to use a scalpel. You couldn't attack him head-on, that was suicide. Internal Affairs was his personal cleanup crew, and any complaint I filed would vanish. No, this had to be different. I had to operate outside the system. I had to become a ghost. Jacobs called me a piece on his board. Fine. A ghost can move anywhere it wants. A ghost sees everything. My objective was clear: destroy Warden Jacobs. Not physically, but his career, his reputation, the whole corrupt world he'd built. And I had to do it so it could never be traced back to me. To do that, I needed leverage. I needed his secret, the one thing he cared about more than his public image. I was sure it was tied to Silas Crane and that vocational restoration program. I started by just watching. I spent hours on the catwalks, watching the flow of materials for Sterling Solutions, watching the trucks, watching the guards Jacobs had handpicked for the workshop. I saw how Silas moved with unearned authority, directing other inmates like a CEO. He wasn't just assembling electronics. He was running an empire. My first real step was to get inside that empire. I had to get to Silas. Threatening him was useless. The warden had his back. So, I dug through his file, his history, his visitor logs. And there it was. A name that appeared once a month, every month. His sister, Chloe. She was his only family. And according to a small note in his medical file, she was very sick. She needed experimental treatments that cost a fortune. Now I knew where the money was going. Silas wasn't just building power. He was earning. But the pennies he made from the official program wouldn't be enough. This was bigger. My theory took shape. Jacobs and Silas were using the Sterling program as a front. They were cooking the books, or maybe they were using the prison workshop to make something else entirely, using state resources for private profit. Getting proof was the hard part. The workshop was a fortress. But I knew Northgate's every weakness, its blind spots, its forgotten tunnels. An old service corridor ran behind the workshop, sealed off years ago. The record said it was a dead end, but I knew better. An old maintenance chief told me once it connected to a ventilation shaft that led right into the workshop's storage room. This was it. This was breaking and entering. If I got caught, I'd lose my pension, my freedom. I'd become one of them. I thought of Miller in that hospital bed. I thought of Jacobs and his smug smile. The law had failed. The system was the crime. I took a deep breath. Some rules are meant to be broken. Late one Tuesday night, during the graveyard shift, I made my move. Dressed in a dark maintenance uniform I'd borrowed, I slipped into the basement. The door to the corridor was rusted shut. It took me 20 minutes with a crowbar, the squeal of the metal making my heart pound. The air inside was thick with dust and decay. I used a headlamp to find my way. Hemlock was right. At the far end, behind a crumbling wall, was the ventilation shaft. I shimmied into the shaft and crawled toward the workshop. Through the grate, I could see the storage room. Boxes with the Sterling Solutions logo everywhere. But in the back, half hidden under a tarp, were other, unmarked boxes. I dropped silently into the room. My hands were shaking as I pulled back the tarp. The boxes were packed with high-end server components, processors, RAM sticks, graphics cards. This stuff wasn't for putting together cheap radios. This was for building powerful crypto mining rigs. The scheme was brilliant. Jacobs was using the prison's massive, state-funded power grid to run a secret crypto mining operation, with Silas as his manager. Sterling Solutions was the perfect cover. I took pictures of everything with a burner phone. But photos could be explained away. I needed something that linked it all directly to Jacobs. I needed the ledger. Every criminal enterprise has one. And a man as arrogant as Jacobs wouldn't trust it to a hard drive. He'd have a physical copy, somewhere he thought was untouchable, his office safe. Getting into the warden's office was impossible. But I didn't need to get in. I just needed to get something out. I couldn't steal the ledger. The chain of custody would be broken, my word against his. No, I couldn't expose him. I had to make him expose himself. This is where the game got really dangerous. I had to plant a seed of doubt. I had to create a trail for someone else to follow, someone with the authority to open that safe. The state auditors were due in 3 weeks. They were box checkers. They wouldn't dig deep unless they were given a very juicy reason to. I had to give them that reason. My target was the warden's pride. I decided to create a red herring, something that would look bad for Jacobs but not ruinous. I fabricated a paper trail, inventory logs, forged requisitions, showing he was stealing high-end food from the prison kitchen for himself. Every time I faked a signature, it felt like I was taking another step off a cliff. The second part was the masterstroke. I needed to get that fake evidence into his safe. I also needed to get my own calling card in there. I bought a tiny GPS tracker, no bigger than a quarter. Now for Silas. I couldn't trust him, but I could use him. I pulled him aside one day, away from the cameras. I didn't threaten him. I appealed to his self-interest. "Your sister, Chloe," I said quietly. "That's a heavy burden." He tensed up. "Don't you talk about my sister." "I'm not," I said. "But the warden is. He's getting sloppy. The crypto mining operation is drawing heat. When it goes down, and it will, he's going to serve you up as the mastermind. He'll walk. You'll get another life sentence. Your sister will be on her own." I could see the conflict in his eyes. "What do you want, Callahan?" "I want to make sure the right person takes the fall," I said. "Jacobs is getting a special delivery tomorrow. I need you to make sure one extra, small box gets included with his personal stuff. Something he thinks is a gift." "What's in the box?" he asked, suspicious. "A bottle of expensive scotch," I lied. "A little something to make him feel appreciated. And careless." Inside the foam packaging, I concealed my fake food ledger and the tiny GPS tracker. Silas, thinking he was setting Jacobs up for a minor fall to save his own skin, agreed. He had no idea what he was really delivering. The next day, I watched as the box was delivered to the warden's office. Jacobs, ever the narcissist, accepted it with a pleased little smile. That night, from home, I activated the tracker. The signal was blocked. That could only mean one thing. It was inside something metallic and shielded. It was inside the safe. He'd taken the bait. He had locked my Trojan horse inside his fortress, right next to, I prayed, his real secret. The final step was the tip. I drove 50 miles to a neighboring town and used a payphone. I called the state comptroller's office, the department in charge of audits. I disguised my voice and told them I was a disgruntled employee at Northgate. I told them Warden Jacobs was running a personal catering service out of the prison kitchen. I gave them dates and items from my fake ledger. I told them the proof was in his office safe. The trap was set. The auditors were coming. And Warden Jacobs, smug and secure, had no idea he was about to be the star witness at his own execution. All I could do now was wait for the show. The day of the audit arrived with a cold, biting wind. A nervous energy crackled through the facility. For the staff, it was a day of forced smiles. For me, it felt like Judgment Day. I had set a tidal wave in motion from a payphone 50 miles away, and now I had to stand on the shore and pretend to be an innocent bystander. The auditors were just as I'd imagined, 2 men and a woman in gray suits, looking tired and unimpressed. I was assigned to escort them to the administration building, a perfect vantage point. I made small talk about the weather, my heart hammering against my ribs. 1,000 things could have gone wrong. We reached the warden's office. Jacobs was in his element, radiating confidence. His suit was perfect, his smile blinding. He was the picture of a modern, transparent administrator. For an hour, they talked numbers. Budgets, staffing, recidivism rates. Jacobs answered every question with smooth, practiced ease. He was winning. Then, the lead auditor, a stern woman named Ms. Albright, cleared her throat. "Warden Jacobs," she said, her tone shifting, "we have one more item. We received an anonymous tip regarding a potential misuse of facility resources." Jacobs's smile didn't falter, but I saw a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Oh," he said lightly. "Disgruntled employees do love to gossip. What is it this time?" "The allegation," Ms. Albright continued, "is that you have been systematically diverting food supplies from the executive kitchen for personal use." She listed 3 items from my fake ledger. Jacobs actually chuckled. "Steaks and coffee? Is that what this is about?" He leaned forward, putting on a show. "I have nothing to hide. Search my office." This was the moment. His pride was the pivot point. Ms. Albright's expression didn't change. "The source claimed you keep a private ledger of these transactions. In your office safe." The room went silent. The trap was sprung. If he refused, he looked guilty. If he agreed, he believed he was calling their bluff. Jacobs spread his hands wide. "My safe. By all means." He stood and walked over to the large black safe behind a painting. "Let's put this nonsense to rest." He spun the dial with a flourish. Click, clack, click. The heavy door swung open. My breath caught in my throat. He reached in and pulled out a slim, leather-bound book, the fake ledger I had made. "Is this what you're looking for?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he tossed it on the table. "It's my personal wine journal." Ms. Albright opened it. She saw the columns and dates, all matching the tip. Her eyes narrowed. "This is quite detailed for a wine journal, Warden," she said coolly. "I'm a detailed man," Jacobs shot back, still in control. But then, as Ms. Albright leafed through the fake ledger, her gaze drifted past Jacobs to the open safe. And she saw it. Tucked behind the scotch, almost hidden in the shadows, was another book. Nearly identical, but older, more worn. It was the real one. The crypto-mining ledger. The one I had gambled my life on him keeping there. "And what," she said, her voice dropping an octave, "is that?" She pointed a single, accusatory finger at the safe. Every head turned. I watched Warden Jacobs's face. It was a slow-motion collapse. The color drained from his cheeks. The smug confidence evaporated, replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. He had been so focused on the red herring, so arrogant, that he had completely forgotten about the real evidence sitting right behind it. He had opened the door to his own tomb. He stammered, That's nothing. Old notes." But it was too late. The spell was broken. Another auditor walked to the safe, reached in, and pulled out the second book. He opened it. Codes, dates, long strings of cryptocurrency wallet addresses. And withdrawal amounts. Huge amounts. It was a record of every single dollar laundered through their secret operation. Ms. Albright looked from the ledger in her hand to the one on the table. She looked at Jacobs, whose face was a mask of pure shock. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. And in a way he had. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The man who always had an answer was finally speechless. He stared at the 2 ledgers, his brain failing to comprehend how this had happened. His eyes darted around the room, searching for the betrayer. His gaze passed right over me, the quiet sergeant by the door. I was just part of the wallpaper. I was invisible. I was a ghost. A new warden was brought in, a no-nonsense veteran. The old rules, based on order and consequence, were slowly put back in place. The balance started to return. Officer Miller eventually came back to work, a scar over his eye and a new hardness in his gaze. He didn't believe in the fiction of the system anymore, but he believed in the line, and in the men who stood on it with him. I never told a soul what I did. It's a secret I'll carry to my grave. I committed a dozen crimes to expose a greater one. I broke my oath to uphold a higher justice. Was it right? In the eyes of the law, absolutely not. I planted evidence, I conspired, I lied. But every morning, when I look in the mirror, I see the face of a man who protected his own, who restored a little honor to a place that had lost it. I played a dangerous game with a corrupt king and won. I didn't do it for glory or revenge. I did it for Officer Miller and for all the officers who walked that line. I did it to prove that even in the darkest of places, one man, one ghost in the machine, can still flip the board. The world of a corrections officer is one of hidden battles and silent wars, where strategy is a more powerful weapon than force. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel for more accounts from the world behind the walls. Thanks for listening.